Let's talk about the Shipping Corporation of India today. The Shipping Corporation's big bet, the national fleet expansion or a national favor. Hello and welcome to our YouTube channel. What does this data say? I am Ajay Prakash. Today's story sounds at first glance like a rare piece of good news from India's public sector. The Shipping Corporation of India (SCI) is suddenly back in the headlines. The plan? Aggressive fleet expansion, especially very large gas carriers known as VLGCs and large crude and product tankers, so that SCI can become the dedicated carrier of crude oil and petroleum products for India's state-owned oil companies. Recently, STI signed a memorandum of understanding with three oil PSUs: the Indian Oil Corporation, the Bharat Petroleum Corporation Limited, and the Hindustan Petroleum Corporation Limited. Under this MoU, they will jointly acquire, own, operate, and manage vehicles that will carry petroleum products, petrochemicals, and other hydrocarbon cargoes, both for international trade and coastal movement within India. In simple language, the oil PSUs will bring the cargo and the shipping corporation will bring the ships and the know-how. If this works as advertised, SCI could become the default national carrier for PSU crude products and gas, something India has never really had at that scale. Now, all this sounds very grand, very patriotic, very Atmanirbhar. A state owned carrier, a national fleet, energy security, what's not to like in this? But there are two reasons this suddenly deserves closer scrutiny. First, the shipping corporation was on the privatization chopping block until yesterday. The government had, in principle, approved to sell its entire 63.75% stake in SCI, and a global tender for strategic disinvestment was floated back in 2020. Multiple bidders came in. Non-core assets were even hived off into a separate land company, SCI Lal, only to facilitate sale. Shipping Corporation Land and Assets, a Schedule C public sector, was incorporated on November 10, 2021 with the objective of holding and disposing of non-core assets of the Shipping Corporation of India. But now the same government is planning to invest fresh capital in SCI to expand its fleet, as per recent reports that talk of government equity infusion to boost SCI's capabilities. This is the same regime that had proudly put Air India, BPCL, Concor, IDBI Bank, and many others on the strategic disinvestment list and actually sold some of them. The press information notification of February 1st, 2021 is shown here, which clearly places Shipping Corporation of India in the strategic disinvestment list for the financial year 21-22. So the obvious question is, why this sudden love story with Shipping Corporation of India? Why was SCI on the sell list a few months ago and now is being treated like a strategic crown jewel? That flip from privatize and exit to invest and expand is what makes today's decision a matter of investigation, not blind celebration. Let's now come to the mechanics. How is Shipping Corporation expected to build this bigger fleet? From what's in the public domain and SCI's own filing, the expansion model looks like a combination of direct ownership, buying ships outright, including new builds placed at Indian shipyards, and selected second hand vessels from the global market. And secondly, leasing and chartering, taking vessels on time charter or bareboat charter, especially when they need capacity quickly or when freight markets are volatile. For example, the shipping corporation has already started acquiring second-hand VLGCs like gas carrier Shivalik for energy trades, issuing tenders for very large crude carriers and other oil tankers by tapping the global S&P market. The company has signed MoUs with some of the largest tanker fleet owners in the world, mostly from Japan, Mitsui OSK Lines, Nippon YKK, Kawasaki KKL, and Qatar Shipping Company and Qatar Gas Transport Company. Qatar Shipping Company is wholly owned subsidiary of Milaha, Qatar Navigation QPSC. Milaha is the parent company that owns Qatar Shipping Company, which in turn operates in various shipping and logistics sector, including its joint ventures. It appears that Milaha, Mitsui, Nippon, and Kawasaki have a history of working together in the business of ship refinancing. Now, who owns Milaha? Of course, they are all related to the Al Thani royal family of Qatar. The chairman, His Highness Sheikh Jassim bin Hamad bin Jassim bin Jaber Al Thani, and the vice chairman is Sheikh Khalid bin Khalifa Al Thani. On the other side, the Qatar Investment Agency has been investing in India through the Adani Group. Qataris have always been rather liberal when it comes to investing in India, especially in the Adani Group. So let's get back to the MOU structure with the oil PSUs. Oil PSU commit long-term cargo volumes, essentially guaranteed business. That steady revenue can support loans or leases for new ships. Shipping Corporation and the JV can then decide case by case which vessels to own for long term strategic need and which to lose for charter in for peak demand or specific routes. This is not unusual. Some of the world's biggest tanker companies follow a similar playbook. For instance, Euronav, a leading crude tanker owner, runs a fleet of over 60 crude tankers, including some on bareboat charter, and deploys them via a mix of spot contract of affreightment and long-term charters. So, on paper, shipping corporations' hybrid approach, some ships owned, some leased, is quite standard for the tanker industry. The question is not whether this model is sound, it usually is. The question is who ultimately benefits from the timing and the contracts. To understand the timing, we have to rewind to the pandemic. From late 2020 into 2021 period, container freight rates globally hit record highs. Some routes rose by 5 to 6 times compared to pre-COVID levels. There were massive disruptions, cancelled sailings, port congestion, container shortages, long delays in key gateways. India felt this severely. Exporters struggled to find containers and book slots. Freight became unpredictable and landed costs shot up. In simple words, the pandemic told India if you don't control your own tonnage, you are at the mercy of global shipping cycle. This is the first lesson that pushed policymakers towards rethinking disinvestment in core logistic assets like the Shipping Corporation of India. Then came Act 2, the Ukraine war and the aggressive sanctions on Russia and Iran. Sanctions did three big things to the oil shipping market. They splintered the world oil market into sanctioned and non sanctioned flows. A huge shadow fleet of older tankers emerged to move Russian and Iranian crude without touching Western insurance or banks. Many of these ships sailed regularly to India and China. Tanker rates surged again because sanctioned vessels were effectively removed from mainstream trades and compliant owners demanded higher premium for the remaining capacity. India, being the third largest oil importer in the world, was right at the center of this storm. In this chaos, one big winner emerged on the Indian side: Reliance Industries. From 2022 onwards, Reliance became one of the largest private buyers of Russian crude in the world. One investigation estimates that Reliance bought roughly $33 billion worth of Russian oil after the Ukraine war started. A separate report notes that just in the first half of 2025, India imported 231 million barrels of Ural's crude, and Reliance plus Naira together accounted for 45% of those imports. What did Reliance do with the cheap oil? It refined Russian crude at its massive Jamnagar complex, the world's largest single site refinery, with a capacity of about 1.2 to 1.4 million barrels per day. Then exported diesel, petrol, and jet fuel to Europe and other markets that could not buy Russian crude directly, capturing a very fat margin in the middle. To make this work, Reliance needed reliable tanker availability. Russian oil had to reach Jamnagar. Refined products had to sail out, often back towards Europe. With mainstream Western tanker owners hesitant to touch sanctioned flows, a mix of shadow fleet tankers and creative chartering filled the gap. So when the rest of the world was struggling with freight and sanction, Reliance managed to arrange enough tonnage one way or the other to keep its Russian crude arbitrage going. Now comes the critical timing. In November 2025, under the pressure of the new US and EU rules that restrict fuels refined from Russian crude, Reliance publicly announced that it has stopped importing Russian crude for its export only SCZ refinery in Jamnagar, effective 20th November. Earlier, Reliance had a long-term arrangement to buy up to 500,000 barrels per day from Russia's Rosneft. Now those exports to Europe have to be based on non-Russian crude. The cheap Russian oil phase is effectively over. Now listen to this. At roughly the same broad time window, the Indian government reconsiders privatization of the shipping corporation, with official briefings saying that global volatility and energy security require stronger state-owned carrier. It signed the MoU that we discussed with IOCL, BPCL, HPCL to jointly build and operate a national fleet for petroleum and hydrocarbon cargo, and signals a plan to invest government capital into shipping corporation to expand its fleet. Is this pure coincidence? Maybe it could be. As sanctions tighten, Reliance will still refine a lot of crude, but now at regular international prices from non Russian sources. The extraordinary profit window from very cheap Russian barrels shrinks. At the same time, the government is ramping up the shipping corporation to handle more PSU crude and product, exactly when one private player's Russian arbitrage is winding down. We do not have public evidence that Reliance's ship or any specific private tanker fleet is being directly handed over to shipping corporation, but the sequence of events is certainly interesting. Let's also put Reliance's refining scale in perspective. The Jamnagar complex alone can process about 1.24 million barrels per day, roughly 60 million tons per year of crude. Now, the point is this: Reliance runs such a gigantic refining machine that when one big arbitrage like cheap Russian oil closes, it will realign, buy from the Middle East or elsewhere, and continue. But the extraordinary discounted Russian crude phase is ending, and with it, the need for such aggressive use of shadow fleet and complex logistics. That naturally raises questions about what happens to the tanker capacity that was servicing the arbitrage, even if much of it was chartered rather than owned. So let's conclude. On paper, the shipping corporation expansion story looks like exactly what many of us have demanded for years: a national shipping carrier with real muscle, a state-backed fleet to move India's crude, LNG, LPG, and petroleum products, a chance to build Indian shipyards, Indian technical expertise, Indian tonnage, rather than forever paying foreign owners in dollars. If Shipping Corporation of India truly becomes that, and if the joint venture with IOCL, BPCL, and HPCL is run transparently, competitively, and in the national interest, then this could be one of the most spectacular PSU turnarounds in recent times. But the timing, coming right as the cheap Russian oil party winds down for private refiners, means citizens are justified in asking who ultimately benefits from the new contract. How will ships be chosen, financed, and leased? Will SCI genuinely build a national fleet, or will it quietly become a convenient vehicle to monetize someone else's arrangement? So, in my closing line today, good luck to the Government of India and the Shipping Corporation of India. If this deal is clean and transparent as we are being told, and if the SCI can really pull this off, India will finally have a sovereign shipping muscle it should have built 20 years ago. Our job as citizens is simple: applaud the idea but verify the execution. Thank you for watching. I am Ajay Prakash.